Welcome to another Maine SBDC webinar. My name is Kelsey Reardon, and we have the lovely Alison Lane with us today to go over understanding your customer with market research and what market research is and how you would go about doing it. The Maine SBDC has some really cool market research tools that we have available to us, and so we can help in this manner in one of the many ways that we try and support the small businesses of Maine. So if you have not already reached out for some business advising, be sure to do that. We're glad that you made it to this webinar one way or the other, so you'll learn a little bit more about us as we go along. You will also receive a follow-up email from me afterwards that will include a recording to today's event and the slides and any other resources that we mention. It will also include a link to the advising button, so you can very easily connect with a business advisor. I'll also include Alison's contact information in case you have any specific questions. In the meantime today, feel free to submit any questions you have at all in the chat. We'll definitely have time at the end to answer any questions that are not answered along the way. And also introduce yourself. Let us know who you are, where you are, and what you do. Perhaps tell us who you think your customer is. Maybe that can be one of the tests. We'll see if you, after the market research, if you were right. And yeah, take this opportunity to network with other business advisors around the state of Maine. One of the silver linings to all of this is that we are doing these events via Zoom, so a lot more people have access to a single event than we would have if we were only hosting this in Portland. So let us know where you are. We have business advisors all over the state who are happy to help. But like I said, we are meeting generally via Zoom these days, so we have pretty easy access. But otherwise, just remember to submit your questions in the chat, and I will pass it over to Alison.
Good morning, everyone. I'm glad we're not hosting this webinar down in Portland. I am up in the Bangor area. I live and working out of my home in Eddington in the woods right now. So if we were down in Portland, that makes for a long day for me to drive down, and a little bit of excitement come down to the big city though. Well, hi everyone. I'm Allie Lane. I'm gonna wait a few minutes here. We'll give maybe 3 more minutes for folks to hop on. I think we had a few more people registered than we're seeing right now. So just hang tight for a few. Like Kelsey said, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat if you'd like. Let us know, what your business is, maybe where you're located, any questions you have off the bat about market research or anything, whatever you want in the chat. Sometimes it's fun to engage in the chat since we typically ask people to stay pretty well muted for the presentation. So the chat is yours too. Well, chat. So we'll just wait a few more minutes for people to hop on. I'm sorry that I don't have background music like my colleague Pete often does in his webinars, but we'll just hang tight for just a few. All right, I think we've got about 10 folks, and I haven't seen anybody new join in the last few minutes. So we will go ahead and get started. We've got a good small group today, so we might do some questions off mute when we get to the end. So that's always fun. So just 1 second, try to make sure I can see enough of my screen. All right, well, welcome everyone. As I said, I'm Allie Lane, a business advisor with the Maine Small Business Development Center at CEI. I typically work out of our Bangor office, so I service Penobscot and Piscataquis counties. But if you're at all familiar with the SBDC, you know that we've got advisors all across the state. So there's someone in your region that knows your area to talk to you about your business one-on-one. So today we're going to talk about market research, which isn't a super exciting topic. It may be a little bit more exciting than numbers and financials. But it is what it is. But I think you'll find it really, really inspiring to understand the power behind conducting good market research and to have a good idea of how to do it yourself, because I know a lot of people don't necessarily know where to start. So first, just a couple of housekeeping things to note. So as Kelsey said, if you were all on when she first started talking, you'll be sent the recording after this webinar. They'll send a follow-up email with my contact information, any relevant links or anything. Sometimes people ask questions that prompt us to say, you know what, let's send you that after. So you'll get a follow-up email. Throughout the presentation, please keep yourself on mute. Like I said, maybe at the end we'll be able to save some time for Q&A and go off mute, but please, just for continuity, stay on mute throughout the presentation. And if you do have questions, please put them in the chat. I'm going to try my best to ignore the chat throughout the presentation so I don't get distracted and go off topic, but we'll tackle them at the end. So if you do put a question, just put a little bit of context behind it. So don't just say, I don't understand, can you explain this further? Because if I read that at the end, I'm not going to know what you were talking about. So please feel free to submit whatever you want in the chat, questions, comments, introduce yourself. That's a good way for folks to sort of stay engaged and involved and make it fun and exciting while we all stare at our Zoom screen for another hour. So first, jump right in. As we talk about market research, you're going to hear me say the phrase target market over and over again. So I thought it was really important to start by addressing what your target market is. So your target market is your most likely, most loyal customers. So some people try to cast a wide net and say that we have something for everyone. We can please all of our customers, a wide demographic, and that's not necessarily the best approach. So a target market is really the people where most of your sales are coming through from. They're your regulars. And if you've heard of the 80-20 rule, you might have heard that 80% of your sales come from 20% of your customers. So that 20% is your target market. We'll get into in a bit why it's important to identify who they are and to learn about them, because it becomes a big part of your market research. Sometimes I also refer to them as the low-hanging fruit. So they are the easiest customers to get money out of. Which sounds awful and greedy, but in all reality, you want to service the people that are the easiest to please for what you're trying to sell. So as I mentioned, your target market is not everybody. And I'm constantly correcting people when they're writing their business plans and they say, we have something for everyone or fun for the whole family, because that's not necessarily the best strategy. And here's why. It's something that I didn't grasp for a long time. But if you cast a wide net, you think, okay, I cast a wide net, I'm going to get more fish. But not necessarily, because if you make a generic post on social media and it reaches 5,000 people, or if you're addressing an audience, you're standing up live talking to 5,000 people, the topic of what you're talking about is going to be very broad. And so of those 5,000 people, what percentage of them are actually going to be interested in what you're saying? Because it's not tailored to what they want to hear. Whereas if you're talking to a small group, or if you're talking one-on-one with someone, you can talk to them, you can really tailor what you're saying and what you're offering to their needs. So it's better to focus your marketing energy and your research energy on that smaller group of people, because you're going to be able to tailor what you're selling to those people. And it's going to be a lot less expensive, and you're going to carry a lot less inventory, and you're going to have a lot less waste. So your target market is not everybody. It's your most likely, most loyal customers that we're talking about when we use the term target market. So just briefly, and this is really a topic for another webinar, we're not going to dig too deep into target market, but what's important to know and understand about these folks, and some questions to start asking yourself when you're trying to figure out who is your target market. Allie told me it's not everyone, so who is it? Demographics. So think about, and sometimes people even will do like a customer persona. So thinking about the people that tend to walk through the door most often, or like I said, your regulars. So demographics, male, female, age, income demographics, are they coming in as a family? Do they come in as a couple? Do they shop as an individual? Do they make a lot of money, or are they really price conscious? Are they not willing to spend a lot of money? So those sort of basic demographics about your most likely, most loyal customers. Behaviors. So what do they do? What are their habits? And of course, again, a topic for a whole nother webinar. I think I did a webinar on this earlier this year. How have those behaviors and habits changed because of the pandemic? And are those changes permanent? There's probably a recording of my customer behavior webinar somewhere on our website, if that interests you. Most importantly, though, and why it's highlighted, are what do they value? What is important to them? And if you can figure out what is important to the 20% of customers that are bringing you your 80% of your revenue, that is so powerful, because then you can really please them over and over and over again and retain them. So just briefly, market research, what's the point? What are the major objectives that you should be striving to answer as you conduct your market research? So note that this first question, is my market large enough, doesn't say target market. It's because sort of your initial, if you're new to business, or you're really just looking to sort of explore, sort of cast a wide net and learn about who your target market is, it's okay to start wide and start by exploring different markets. You know, you don't necessarily want to go into it and say, I know who my target market is, and I'm only going to talk to those people. So first, sort of the feasibility test, you know, does your idea have legs? So is there a market out there, and is that market large enough? So are there people that are actually willing to buy what you're selling? Or is it just a cool idea that you had? Are you the only one that thinks it's cool? And unfortunately, sometimes that is the case when folks get really passionate about their idea. So really figuring out, is there a market out there that's large enough for you? And then hone in a little bit. So think of it like a funnel. Okay, who are those people? And back to what we talked about a minute ago, you know, what's their gender, what's their age, what do they do, what do they value? So start with sort of a wider net, and then as you conduct more research, funnel it down and figuring out who that 20% of your best target market customers are going to be. And then continuing to sort of funnel down and dig into more detail. How can you best satisfy that 20%? Because remember, we're not trying to satisfy everyone. We are not trying to please everyone. And as someone, I owned a restaurant, and in the beginning, I tried to please everyone, and someone would come in with one little request, hey, you should really serve this. And backwards to put it on the menu, and then find that that one person was the only person that wanted it. Well, that one person was not part of my target market, and I needed to redirect my energy to please the larger group of people that were going to be buying from me more often. So market research can help teach you, is there a market that's willing to buy what you're selling? Does your idea have legs, is sometimes how we describe it. Who is your target market? So who is the 20% of people that you should actually be tailoring your offerings and your marketing to? And how can you best satisfy those people? It is worth noting the priority of these objectives can vary. So for example, I did a presentation, ironically enough, on market research to CEI's Child Care Business Lab a couple weeks ago. And we talked a lot less about, is my market large enough? Because a lot of research had already been done. The whole point of CEI's Child Care Business Lab is to bring childcare businesses to the state of Maine, because there is such a need, there's such a demand. So that research had already been done, that ship had sailed. These folks knew that their idea had legs, childcare was needed. So if you're in an industry and you know there's an obvious need, now don't assume that there's an obvious need, but if it's really obvious, like childcare, then you can focus your research a little bit differently. So I spent most of the time in that webinar and working with those folks on how to best satisfy the people within their region. So figuring out their wants and needs in a childcare business, so they could tailor these brand new businesses to the wants and needs. So your objectives are going to vary by your industry, by where you're at in your business. I know that, you know, not all of you on this call, maybe none of you are starting up, maybe many of you have been in business for many years. So the priority of your objectives can vary, and that's okay. So market research is really about, it's the closest you can come to having a crystal ball. So what if you really knew what your customers were thinking and wanting? You know, what if you were inside your head, or their heads? Like, how great would that be? You could say exactly what they want to hear. So that's what market research is. It's the closest we can come to seeing inside of their head. And sometimes it's as simple as just asking, what do you want? So if I haven't already convinced you to pay attention, what does market research do for you? So first of all, like I said, it can see if your idea has legs. So it can test the feasibility of your idea, making sure that there's a market large enough, in that it's regionally appropriate. So maybe you have an idea that would work really well in New York City, but the lovely state of Maine is not ready for it yet because we're a little bit behind the 8 ball. So learning about your market can let you know that when you open your doors, or when you introduce this new idea to your market, that it's going to have legs to stand on, it's going to make you money. Market research can help save you money because, again, as you learn about your target market, it can help you tailor your offerings. So tailor your inventory and structure your advertising to reach out to those people that are going to pay you the most, that are willing to pay the most for what you're selling, and that are going to shop with you most frequently, whether you're selling a product or a service. And it can help, as far as advertising goes, it can help you adjust your language. Again, topic for another webinar for another day. But if you're advertising, on social media and you write a general post that is, like I said earlier, casting a wide net to a wide audience, a lot of people, even if 5,000 people see it, they're not likely to pay attention and listen to it. Whereas if they feel like you're talking directly to them, if you address a specific issue that they're having, instead of listing 5 issues that they may be having, they're going to read that and feel like it was written for them. So market research, understanding the people that you're trying to talk to, can allow you to tailor your language to get them to actually listen to you, even though they, on the internet is so saturated with information. So it's really important to get people to listen to you and pay attention to you. Can help you price appropriately. So understanding what your market is willing to pay, what they're able to pay. So if they're really price sensitive, that you have to compete based on price and recognize that if they have another option, if there's a competitor offering what you're selling for a cheaper price, it's going to matter to them. But there are markets that care less about price. So like when I go on vacation, I'm paying a lot less attention to what I'm spending. That's why tourist locations can charge more, is because you don't care about price as much. And market research can also help you if you need to get a loan or present your concept to some sort of an investor or a granting agency. They often want to see financial projections. And even if somebody doesn't ask for financial projections, they can be super helpful for you to have. But it's basically projections are looking forward to see, okay, here's what I'm anticipating spending. Here's what I'm anticipating bringing in for money. And is my bottom line positive? Am I going to be able to make enough cash flow to carry me through to the next month? So understanding the size of your market, the willingness of what they're going to spend, how often they're going to walk through the door, all of that helps compile the information to make estimates as far as revenue estimates, sales estimates moving forward, which can be super challenging. But the more research you do, the easier it is. And we're not done yet. What else can market research do for you? So again, like I've harped on, probably should have just taken this line out of the slide, understand your target market. Absolutely. And with that, it can help you connect with that target market. Like I said, tailor the language to them, tailor your offerings, and really be something extra for them. Instead of trying to be, mediocre for everyone, why not try to be extra special for that 20% of people that's going to bring you 80% of your revenue? So how do you do it? And that's the hard part. So first, just some rules of thumb. We're going to talk about secondary research and primary research and how to physically get started, because I know that's what a lot of you are sitting here wondering, like, okay, this is great, I'm sold, but how do I get started? So first of all, just some rules to follow, because any research you do, if you don't follow these rules, is going to be skewed and not helpful. So be objective. Don't lead the people you're trying to understand into giving you the answer that you either think you want to hear or assume they're going to say. So it's like if you're writing a survey to introduce your new idea, and you say, how do you feel about, do you want, if I live in Bangor, do you want to see a Mexican restaurant come to Bangor? Okay, well, obviously everybody's going to say yes. Okay, yeah, another restaurant, Mexican, unless somebody really has a problem with Mexican food, they're not going to say no. So a better question to ask might be, if you're trying to figure out what kind of restaurant you're going to open, it would be to ask that, what kind of restaurant would you like to see come to Bangor. And then you could either give them multiple choice, or I love open-ended questions. And if you can craft a survey or an interview and allow people to just kind of spill their guts open-ended, great. Keeping in mind that some people are lazy and would rather select multiple choice. Not that that makes you inherently lazy just because you prefer multiple choice, but you can't ask too much of people. We're all limited on time. So don't lead with your research. Don't come into it with assumptions like you know what's going to happen. The whole point is to learn something. So you don't want to come in and research just to back up this idea that you've already had. And it can be tempting if you're trying to write a business plan to please a lender. It can be tempting to want to go out and do research that's going to back up what you're trying to say. But we're not politicians here. That's not the point. We want to make sure that our new business or our business expansion is actually going to work. So we'd rather have the bank say no than have the bank say yes and then fail 2 months down the road because the research wasn't accurate. And then I say cast a wide net, and I'm cautious with this because I know that as we're talking about target market earlier, I was saying don't cast a wide net. But when it comes to that initial research, it's okay to cast a wide net because you want to get information from the most amount of people because your target market might not be who you think it is. So when you start, cast a wide net, and then as you come down that funnel and start to figure out who your market is, narrow it down a little bit. Or many of you, like I said, you may already be in business and you might have already been in business for many years. So if you already know who your target market is and you want to better please them and do research to figure out how to introduce a new offering, or again, just how to make them happier, then don't all of a sudden cast a wide net, try to figure out a new market if that's not your objective. So research with a wide net, advertise with a spear. I thought that was pretty clever and it's pretty accurate. I love metaphors. So first, we're going to go a little bit backwards here. I actually, about an hour ago, swapped my slides because originally we talked about primary research, but we're going to start with secondary research because I think that's what's most familiar. Most of you, when you think of market research, you think about a Google search or census data, or looking up a database or hiring a market research firm. That's kind of what's familiar to us. And what secondary market research is when someone else has already collected the information and you read it, analyze it, understand it, use it to, further your idea or to justify your idea. And that's great. And that is helpful. Again, back to those primary rules that we talked about being objective and whatnot, you do have to make sure that the information you're collecting is from a credible source and that it's not biased. Make sure that, if you're reading the results of someone else's survey and their questions were leading, it's not going to be great information. So you have to be cautious about the sources of your secondary research, but this can be helpful. I will tell you what I find with our clients. Kelsey mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we have a couple of research tools at the SBDC that we use. There's SBDC Net and Vertical IQ are two different tools that we use with clients a lot, and they're helpful. More helpful in some industries and some situations than others, but I will find they turn up a lot of national data, which in the state of Maine, like I said, we're a little bit behind the 8 ball on a lot of things. So sometimes the national data is not actually reflective of what's happening in Maine. And sometimes even what's happening in Maine is not reflective of what's happening in your region. If you're opening a business in Portland versus Holton or Prescott, or Bangor, it's different things going on. So keep in mind that secondary research can be pretty broad and isn't always tailored to your region. So just, be aware of that. Again, secondary research is often the easier research to collect. It's less legwork and it can be helpful, but you should make sure to carefully examine the source and make sure that it's not biased. So moving on to primary research, there's a reason that there's a green square on this, and that's because to me, I prefer primary research. In most industries, I think primary research is more beneficial. It's a lot harder because you have to go out and do the legwork, but it's going to get you down to the nitty gritty. And I shouldn't assume that most of you on the call, the types of businesses you're operating, but if you're serving a smaller geographic market, or maybe just folks in the state of Maine as opposed to selling out of state, it's a lot more important to understand the folks that are actually in your geographic market. So primary research is when you go out and collect the information. And this is what often people don't know where to start. So the general theme is don't be afraid to ask questions of your customers, current customers, of your potential customers, of folks that, yeah, I really not sure that you're in my target market, but Ali told me to cast a wide net, so I'm going to talk to you too. Don't be afraid to ask questions. People love to talk. I don't know if any of you have been on social media lately, but people love to share their opinions, like too much. So take advantage of that. Don't be afraid to cold call or cold email or put out a post on social media asking, hey, what kind of restaurant do you want to see come to Bangor? Because people will answer. So interviews are great. If your market is small enough that talking to maybe 5 to 10 to 15 people will give you a good idea of your target market, interviews are wonderful. Even if it's just a quick 10-minute phone call, hey, can I pick your brain? I just want to, get a feel for what people that are shopping in my area are looking for. Just come up with a few questions, maybe 3 questions that you're asking them to try to figure out what you're trying to learn from them. And if you can interview them one-on-one, or it's not included here, but even conducting like a focus group. So maybe it's a Zoom call with 3 to 10 people where you're just kind of chatting, like a panel where you're just trying to get a feel for, let people talk and just listen. Don't keep asking questions, just listen to what they're saying. And I've been trying lately to embrace the silence. So if there's a moment of silence, if you just can resist the urge to fill that, somebody else is going to chime in and give you something valuable. It's an interesting sort of human psychology trick I've been playing with lately. So if you can interview or do a focus group with people, that's going to get you some really deep understanding. It's not going to get you a lot of data. It's not like a survey where you could send it out to 100 or 200 people and get back that many responses. So an interview is going to get you deeper information. A survey is going to get you more broad data, which can also be helpful. There's a lot of do's and don'ts of conducting surveys, and we don't really have time to dig into them today, but I would say work with your SBDC advisor. If you're thinking about conducting a survey, we can help make sure that it's succinct and it's not asking any leading questions. And it's not asking too much of the people that are taking it. So, some multiple choice, some open-ended. So we can certainly help you with the do's and don'ts of a survey, because there are a lot of ways to do it wrong and a lot of ways to do it right. Observation. So this is a fun one, can be borderline creepy. So when I opened my restaurant, it was a coffee shop, and I spent a lot of time just sitting in other coffee shops, and consuming food and beverages. I'm not, that'd be rude to just sit there and not. And I would be working on my business plan, but I'd also be watching the people walking in the door, and I'd be listening. What are they ordering? Are they taking it to go? Are they eating in? If anybody's complaining, what are they complaining about? So just kind of watching. On another slide, there is a mention about being cautious when it comes to primary research. You don't want to invade anybody's privacy or legality of observing things. Be reasonable here, but it is okay. Observe what your target market is doing, maybe when they're shopping with competitors, or maybe in your own facility or with your own. What are people doing? And along with that, reading the reviews. So one sort of fun thing to do is go on social media and Google and maybe Yelp or TripAdvisor and look at your competitors. Of course, you should be reading and responding to your own reviews if you already have reviews coming in, but look at your competitors. What are people complaining about? What do they like? What are they commenting on? And keep in mind, it can be skewed. So if you are a hotel and you're reading one of your competitor is, you're sort of a Holiday Inn and your competitor is the Ritz. And you're reading the reviews and people are commenting about the beautiful architecture in the lobby and the high-end spa in their bathroom. Okay, well, realize just because people are commenting on that at the Ritz doesn't mean they want that at your hotel. Like if they're paying, $75 a night, they're not going to care about the architecture in your lobby. So keep in mind the things in people's reviews are going to be tailored to what that business is trying to project to please their target audience, but it can be really insightful, especially if you start to see patterns. If you read 30 reviews, and in 15 of them are negative, and in those 15, they all mention the same thing, and you believe you share somewhat of the same target market, you've learned something that's important to people. If they're all complaining about price and you believe that your target market is somewhat price sensitive, oh, okay, well, maybe I need to pay attention to that, but that matters. And other things like traffic counts, that can be something you can collect from a local municipality, figuring out, if you're trying to gauge the feasibility of location, how much traffic is going by. And definitely talk to your local economic development folks. If you're in a city or town or county that's large enough to have an economic development team, utilize them, because they can be wonderfully helpful, and they understand what's going on in their city or town and can tell you what's needed, what's not. I know I talked to a lady with Bangor Economic Development a couple years ago and said, what would you like to see come to downtown Bangor? And we talked about the types of businesses that she thought, the area was already saturated with. We talked about what she'd like to see. They conducted some surveys that she gave me access to. So don't hesitate to talk to the municipality. They can be really helpful. So a couple of best practices for both secondary and primary research: balance national and local data. So we talked about this a little bit. Make sure that if you're collecting data, that it's not, if your target market is a 20-mile radius with around Bangor, Maine, and you're looking at the national scape, it's going to be a very different audience. Partly because Maine is different, but you could say the same thing for any country across the United States, is that what's going on across the nation is not necessarily reflective of what's going on in your region. But national data can be super helpful for big numbers, collecting, hearing from a wide variety of people, thousands, millions, whatever. And it can also be sort of inspiring. So that's what I found from our SBDC Net tool, that when we conduct research for clients, it comes back with a lot of interesting trends. Here, a trend in this industry that's starting up is this. And sometimes it's kind of inspiring for people. They're like, well, you know what, maybe this is something, maybe Maine is ready for this and I can introduce this to my area. It's worked well in other places. Maybe it's not so crazy that Maine couldn't handle it. So it can be inspiring to read national data and read about trends, can allow you to bring something new to the area. Again, I think I've harped on this enough, but note potential biases. Make sure that the research you're reading is from a credible source, that the questions have not been phrased in such a way. If the audience that the research targeted is a specific, if it was if they're looking for fitness industry data and they only have talked to people that already go to gyms, that's sort of a biased audience because they're all already have proven to have interest in that. But if you're looking to cast a wider net, make sure that you're talking to or reading research about a larger group of people. And then of course, respect privacy and legality with your primary research. So observation is great, interviews, asking what people want, surveying people, but respect the fact that although a lot of people like to share their opinions, some people are just gonna be like, no, leave me alone, or they're not gonna respond, don't send them 50 emails, maybe send one and then a follow-up, just wanna make sure you got this, but don't harass them. And if you're observing, don't do anything illegal. I hope that goes without saying, but I feel like for legality purposes, I should say that to protect the SBDC at CEI. So last, and then we're going to dig into some questions. Make sure that you're tracking your results. So you're doing all this great research, you're talking to a lot of people, and you're starting to kind of form your own new set of assumptions. So maybe some things have surprised you. You've learned a few things. Maybe one person said something particularly eye-opening that you wrote down in big capital letters in your notebook. But make sure that as you're tracking your results, that you're not then sort of creating this new bias or this new assumption just because a couple people mentioned something. So if you can find a numerical way to track what you're doing. So like if you're reading reviews, instead of just reading 30 reviews and having sort of this mental picture of what you think is going on, what people are complaining about, what they like, maybe you're using keywords. So maybe you count the number of times in a review that someone mentions cleanliness, if you're a hotel or a restaurant or whatever. So maybe some keywords, and you're kind of tallying, okay, well, this many people mentioned this many people complained about this. So try to make sure that you're measuring in a way that isn't just your own sort of brain translating what's happening, because we do tend to get excited about certain things and we hear what we want to hear. And so make sure you're tracking on paper. Watch for skews in your data. So again, making sure that if you only talk to a certain audience, you know, if you interviewed 10 people, but they all were women, make sure you acknowledge that and realize, okay, well, you know, they might have said that because of their demographic or because of their age or whatever. There is a little bit of stereotyping that comes into the target market discussion, and that's okay as long as you're not, you know, again, protect yourself legally and make sure you're not discriminating and whatnot. But mentally, sometimes there are those stereotypes, and sometimes those do ring true for customer behavior. And last, as you're tracking your results and you're analyzing it and you're learning new things, do something about it. So sort of the final step of market research, and it's a revolving door, it's never really ending, but make sure that you are adapting to them. So don't take the time to do all this research and then never change anything about what you're doing. So one time when I had my restaurant, I put out a survey. I called it a virtual suggestion box on social media. And I basically just kind of opened it up and let people, I was like, what do you want me to do? Like, what do you like? What do you not like? What are your complaints? And I think I got like 30 responses, and it was pretty solid. And some of them were hard to read. And some of them were out of left field, random things like, oh, I really wish you sold cheeseburgers, like whatever, you know, it was a little coffee shop. I didn't have the equipment to sell cheeseburgers. So I had to realize that some of those things are going to be people that are outside of my target market. But if I saw a common theme, so for example, I think a lot of people complained about parking or something. Now, granted, there wasn't much I could do about my parking situation, but better signage and directing people and telling them how to get to the other parking lot a lot of people didn't know about. So I had to make sure to do something about it when I did find a common trend. When I learned something from my research that was solid and unbiased, you got to make sure to adapt to what you learn. So last, just sum up sort of the key takeaways. This is the part where if you grasp nothing thus far, pay attention to these 4 things. The better you know your customer, the better your business will perform, because you'll be saving money. You'll be talking directly to the people that are going to bring in the most. You'll be pleasing the people that are bringing in 80% of your revenue. Put the boots to the ground. So I attended a webinar at our national conference a couple of years ago that was called Forget Your Business Plan, Go Out and Talk to Customers. That was the name of the webinar. It was kind of lengthy. And at first I went into it skeptical because I was like, no, business plans are my life. Like, that's what we do day in and day out. I'm not going to forget it. But this guy had me convinced after like 30 minutes that if you actually go out and talk to people and learn from people, it's far more beneficial than sitting there making assumptions and trying to craft this plan to what you think is what people want. So get out and talk to people. Be objective, don't assume, don't be biased. Make sure that you're not going into it with preconceived notions, not just collecting data to back up something that you are trying to prove to a lender or to yourself. And keep track of what you're doing. Analyze that data. Some people, I'm sort of one of these people, if you've met our other advisor, Rainer Large, you know how some of us advisors really like numbers, and it's fun for us to assign numerical data to qualitative data. If that's not you, you don't have to get too crazy with it, but just make sure that you're tracking your results in an objective way and not just sort of collecting it in the back of your mind. And last, adapt to what you learn. Because that's the whole point, is that you take this research and you do something with it. So I'm going to stop there. I haven't looked at the chat to see if there are any questions, but that's where we'll go from here. And I guess I'll bring up this last slide too, so you can see and take note of our website, our email. The big orange request advising button is your best friend. If you want to talk one-on-one with someone, we can really dig in. These webinars, we have to keep them kind of broad and high level. And in my webinars, I use a lot of retail, restaurant, hospitality examples, because that's where my background is. And some people are, like, that has nothing to do with my business. I'd really like for her to use some other examples. well, that's fine. Go click that orange button, talk to a business advisor, and they can use examples that are tailored to your business idea. So let's see what we've got for some questions.
We've got one question that is a pretty good follow-up to what you were just saying. Jen was asking, is there an app that would help collect traffic counts or observation data? Or in general, I guess, is like, what would you say is a good way of tracking the data that you are collecting? Are there apps?
Good question. Not that I know of, no. Not that they're not out there. I mean, they very well could be. Traffic, as far as traffic counts go, that when I started my business, I did that sort of the old-fashioned way. And it's not, I'm not necessarily saying go do this because it wasn't super efficient, but I literally just parked my car outside of my location at different times of day. And like, I wanted to figure out what made sense as far as, should I open at 5 in the morning or 7 in the morning? So I sat in my car and I counted to figure out how many people, and I did it for a couple of days. I didn't like every day, but I did it like a Monday and a Saturday. And then the following month I did, you know, so, and figured out that 6:30 was prime time to open. And, you know, I gotta say that worked really well. 6:30 ended up being, the 3 years that I operated the business, 6:30 was prime for opening. It wasn't too early, it wasn't too late. So literally counting traffic worked for me because I had a small enough business. I had my location. I think talking to the municipality or using like local census data is probably the best way to collect it if you're trying to get a feel for large amounts of traffic. Also, if you're scoping out a location, talking to the other businesses around that location to get a feel for, hey, I'm thinking about opening a business here or expanding my business into this space. What times of day do you find, what, you know, there's a light there, is traffic getting backed up at certain times of day? Or when are you busy? And obviously they're going to be they may be a different business, totally different industry, but they can give you a feel for the vibe of the area. So yeah, I wish there may be an app, but not one that I'm aware of.
I'm a solid believer in spreadsheets, so I'm always going to suggest you just throw another tab on your spreadsheet and keep plugging that data in there so that you can go back to it at some point. Everyone else.
Well, and if you're not, I love spreadsheets. Go ahead, Kelsey.
I'm just going to say, there aren't any other questions so far, so everyone should take this time now to submit a question in the chat while Alison finishes this next statement.
Yeah, I love spreadsheets too, but I know that spreadsheets aren't for everyone. So I would say just writing, keeping like, even if it's a paper notebook. I had a client that came in with like this paper notebook just full of information because he was so excited about his idea. And it was really cool. I worked with him. We tried to organize like, okay, let's see what you've got written down here. Better if it's on the computer and we're having a Zoom call and you can share your screen with me. And then I can help you organize. So again, that might be you know, working with a trusted advisor or someone that does like data collection, because I know spreadsheets are not for everyone, but they are wonderful.
Yep. So Patricia's asking, what are some examples of internet searches to find info? They're not sure where to start.
It's a good question. And I mean, it all depends on what you're trying to learn. So I guess start with that. Actually, I'm gonna go ahead and just. Yeah,
so Patricia does jewelry and is working on a new e-commerce site. So it looks like she's sticking to that birch theme, which I love. So I encourage, I'm your target audience. So
you start by interviewing Kelsey. No. Yeah, I think it kind of comes back to what are you trying to learn? So what's your objective of your research? It sounds like in your case, you're an operating business, but you're launching, you're focusing now on e-commerce, which is, you know, a thing that's happening a lot right now because of the pandemic, is folks are, okay, I'm not getting as much traffic in person, or any traffic in person. So time to refocus. Where I would start would be talking to your, I mean, and this doesn't really answer your question because I know you're kind of talking about internet searches and secondary research, but I would start by talking to your existing customers, you know, reaching out to the people that have shopped with you for, you know, maybe many years and figuring out why, if I start selling it online instead of in the store, you know, is that something, are you game for that? Or do I need to explore a new market? And some of them might say, you know what, I come to you, I like your shop. You know, I'm not sure if you have a physical shop, but I like to touch, I like to try things on, I like to see what they look like. I like to handle them. So you got to kind of realize, okay, well, that's not necessarily well suited for e-commerce. But if they say, you know what, yeah, I've adapted because we've been in this pandemic for so long. I'm so used to online shopping. I'm totally okay with buying jewelry online as long as you got some good pictures and whatnot. I always use the example back, like, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 months ago now, when we were sort of like somewhat new to the pandemic. I bought my first pair of shoes online, and that was like a big thing. So it was something I never bought online before, but all of a sudden I had to. So people are changing. So I'd say start by talking to your existing market if you are fortunate enough to already have one.
That's good. I also am very opposed to buying shoes online. I want to try them on. So Jen is asking, how do you reply to good reviews on Google Business or Facebook or Square or whatever it is? Like, what's the best way to do that?
I'm glad you brought up replying to reviews, because that's a fun topic. Good reviews, that's pretty easy. So no matter what, keep it brief. Whether it's good or bad, keep it fairly brief. With a good review, just, hey, thanks, hope to see you again soon. If you can make it personal a little bit, maybe the customer's name, maybe they mentioned a specific product. Maybe even thanks, if you liked this, try this. But keep it real brief and simple. Don't go too crazy. Don't be like overly enthusiastic, like thank you so much, all in caps and excellent. Like, keep it professional. But basically just show your appreciation. I really appreciate you saying that. Now, I can't answer this question without talking about how to address bad reviews. I so wish I could use a local example, because I have a business in mind that's really terrible at responding to bad reviews. They get very defensive. They write like long paragraphs. It's like painful for me to read. If someone does write a negative review, you should absolutely acknowledge it, even if it's way out of left field. So if it's something that's totally inappropriate, not a constructive negative review, you should still acknowledge it. I have heard that you should leave it to, and both positive and negative, leave it to one response. So if they continue to talk to you after that, you can invite them to private message you, but don't have a dialogue back and forth. If someone writes a negative review, you respond, they respond again. Like, don't keep going. I'll invite them to talk to you privately. But just keep, negative reviews, how to respond to negative reviews, it really depends on the review, but good rules of thumb: keep it brief, professional, respectful. Don't necessarily admit wrongdoing. Don't shoot yourself in the foot, but also don't be defensive. So yeah, that would be a fun webinar, Kelsey, is how to respond to reviews. That could be very like
thinking that. Yeah, I mean, people are just looking for validation. People just want to be heard. Acknowledging whatever it is usually good enough. I find that I have more respect for businesses that I can see engage with negative comments in a way that is constructive and is clearly like open to it, but is not going to engage beyond what needs to be said. So that sounds good. Definitely, if you have any more questions, throw them in the chat. I don't see any more right now, but I do think it would be a fun exercise to do a responding to comments session.
I could even come up with like fake bad reviews.
Right, we could have like role plays.
Yeah.
People could submit like, hey, I have this comment and I don't know how to respond, and we could help piece together a response. I like this. Well,
I'm
Alison,
volunteering for this webinar. Email.
Well, great. So everyone, look out for that webinar in the future. It'll be on our schedule before you know it. You also mentioned one of your sessions that you did earlier, and
consumer behavior.
That's right. I'll try and include a link to that in my follow-up email as well. I'll go look for that. I'm pretty sure it's recorded too. Yeah. So takeaway sounds like a good idea. Oh, Patricia's saying, I take it negatives never go away. But in what I was trying to say is sometimes people really just need that validation. And so, someone saying like, I had a terrible experience there, and you say, I'm so sorry that was your experience. Like, is there something that we could improve in the future? Like sometimes like their terrible experience was that like they had to stand in line for 15 minutes and it's not that serious, but they felt offended. And so like that little response can nip that negativity like in the bud more than take it away.
Well, and I think the review is always going to be there for the world to see. So if you can respond and show, you know, like I said, you got to be careful not to be defensive, but if you can kind of get like, I remember the worst for me were bad reviews that said false information, like, oh, hey, I bought this product and it had this in it. And it's like, no, it doesn't. So I had to figure out a way to craftily respond and say, well, this is the ingredients, you know, this is how we make that. I apologize if there was an error made because an employee could have put the wrong thing in it or whatever. But so you don't want a negative review just kind of hanging out there with false information. And sometimes people are just going to be absurd too, and they're just going to say horrible things. And I always hope that the other customers reading those reviews can realize when somebody's being a little outrageous. But if you can clear the air in any way, because that negative review is always going to sit there on your page, just sort of as a black stain, it's going to bother you.
Yeah, and so then if there's a record of you responding respectfully and willing to have that dialogue, people can read the crazy in the comment next to your normal response, and they can take that review with a grain of salt for what that review actually means.
Before we go to Joe's question, I just see the comment about if they give you a low star rating, that could linger for a long time. Some people just look at the number of stars. I had a client come to me a while ago that was really upset because she had a limited number of reviews and someone had posted a 1 star and it was someone that hadn't even been, it was almost like a troll. Like they'd never been to the location. Maybe it was even a mistake. They didn't mean to post 1 star. And that happens. And yeah, people look at the star ratings. I'd like to say they don't only look at the star ratings, but there's nothing you can do about those trolls or the accidents. You might be able to reach out and ask them to remove it privately if you really think it was an accident, or reply to it. I remember seeing one time, they said they hadn't even been in yet, but they made a negative comment. And the person replied and said, you know, please, we invite you to come in and check us out and please, maybe you'll improve your star rating then. But yeah, there's not much you can do. And people do pay a lot of attention to the number of stars.
Just on that note, and I will preface it with like a warning that sometimes the language is colorful, but if you have not checked out, it's like Small Business Memes Instagram account, it is hilarious. It is small businesses submitting wild reviews and direct messages that they're getting from customers, and how they have to react to, or like how they respond to it. And so sometimes people are not mature about it, but sometimes it can give you a really good idea of like how to engage with those types of customers, because things can get a little outlandish, and having some strong examples of how to respond to those situations. They tend to make it pretty funny in the way that they do it, but I will just preface it with the language can be colorful. So go into it with your own comfort level with that. But yeah, I did see Joe's question. When starting to craft questions I want to ask during interviews, how do you determine if I'm asking the right thing?
Yeah, that's tricky. It kind of comes back to what are you keeping in mind? What are you really trying to learn? So I had a advising session with a client the other day, and I have to be really cautious because the industry was kind of specific. So I don't want to say the industry and confidentiality, but they were trying to get a few answers as far as scheduling about when to open their business. And we sat there and we just agonized over what is it that you're really trying to figure out. And he was trying to figure out the popularity of his business offering between like 5 and 10 p.m. And so we realized, okay, well, if that's really what he wants to know, we don't need to ask them about noontime. We don't need to ask if they want to come at noon. We just need to ask if they want to come at 5, 6, and that doesn't really make too much sense without knowing the industry. But so really go back to what are you trying to learn? You know, we're not attorneys here. We're not asking questions that we already know the answers to. Like the whole point is to ask things you don't know. So as far as in an interview, maybe also keeping in mind the audience. So if you're only interviewing a select portion, you know, you probably, if you're doing interviews, you won't have time to cast as wide a net as if it were a survey or secondary research. So who are the folks that you're talking to, and what information can you get from them? We had an interesting discussion in the childcare business lab about this the other day. So their first objective was come up with a list of people they want to talk to, and then their second objective was what are the questions that you're going to ask them? What do you need to know? And they were asking questions about when, what days of the week do you need childcare? What scheduling wise, do you need it more early mornings or late afternoons more? So it kind of keeps, I know I keep saying this, but it keeps coming back to what is it that you're trying to learn from these people, and what's the best way to ask that?
I think that's a good idea, though, of like working backwards. So what answers are you looking for? How can you build questions that get you those answers? And that'll move you along. Well, thank you so much, Allison. Thank you everyone for joining. I don't see any other questions, and we're just about out of time. So thank you all so much. I will be sending out a follow-up email that will include a recording. So if there was anything you wanted to go back to review, as well as her slides and some of those extra resources and our contact information, so that if you have any other follow-up questions, we can set you up with a business advisor and keep you moving along. We got lots of thanks coming into the chat. So thank you so much, Allison. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Have a good rest of your day.